Stay tuned after the episode to hear our latest edition of And Then What?
Fitz.
Marco, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Let's always start with the pleasantries, right? I mean, come on.
I'm curious if you've ever had a moment in the outdoors that you think has changed your life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot. But actually, the one funny thing that comes to mind right now is a moment that relates to outdoors, but it didn't happen outdoors. And it is the moment that I walked into a climbing gym when I was 19 years old. Like, straight up. Stone Gardens, Ballard Locks, walked in, terrible pea gravel, old gym, but it was amazing. Like, I was like, where has this been my whole life? Like that, it was so pronounced, and it changed the trajectory of my life so much so that it's oftentimes, like, I think that more often than not, there are like moments like that where something really does happen. You find something and you're just brought in and you're like, where has this been all my life? And for me, like, that first climbing gym I climbed out was that thing. There's something really powerful about climbing gyms, not just in America, but all over the world. You know, like, I think that is something that, as I've watched this sport grow, you realize like what that does is that it is a cool thing. And that's why there have been gyms that have opened in the West Bank of Palestine. That is why there are people in Indonesia that are winning gold medals in speed climbing because they set up the speed wall in Indonesia. And it does incredible things for people. And I still feel like, for me, the climbing gym, it's this wild thing. You know, even though it's this indoor experience, it's still just like part of my world. Like, I feel kind of at home when I go to a climbing gym. Like, I know the people behind the desk. I know the people that run the thing. And it still feels like an extension of being outside for me.
Well, today we're talking with Nate George. He's the owner and operator of Fen Rock Climbing Center in the English village of Wisbech.
What a great name, Wisbech.
I don't know. I mean, you know, what do you associate with climbing in the United Kingdom? What does that bring up for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like, the culture of climbing is super rich in the UK, but the funny part about it is that there is a limited amount of stone. The Brits were graced with the demeanor for climbing, but not necessarily the playgrounds for it. That said, there's some great, I'm going to get hate mail, but there are some great places to climb. But they've had this really sort of interesting thing where it's not everywhere. It's not like how it is in many countries in Europe where there is limitless stone. And so it can kind of be out of the way. It can be kind of hard to access. It can be kind of dangerous. And I think it is an acquired taste.
Totally. And there's no one better that knows this than Nate George, because he literally built his climbing gym in an area of the UK that is below sea level. Everything that us climbers associate with, you know, UK climbing, like the gritstone and the sketchy run-out trad, Nate George was adamant that where he lives is not that.
Where we are, there's no climbing culture at all. They've never been climbing. They've seen some rocks on a holiday once, but that's as far as it goes. So we've kind of had to create this culture and this community in this area. I think that community is now developing into a point where it's getting stronger. You know, we're having people coming in that are pushing that kind of V10, V11 boundary, which a few years ago I couldn't even imagine. But now for this little tiny centre, we're doing that.
Nate's story isn't just an example of great entrepreneurship, but it shows that no matter what your idea is, whether you're starting a business or planning an adventure, the more patience and trust you invest in yourself now or in the moment, it'll end up paying off in the end.
I'm Marco Seiler Gonzalez.
I'm Fitz Cahall. You're listening to the Dirtbag Diaries.
I'm Nate George. I started the Bouldering Centre in 2016 and I've been running it for the last decade. I chose to start it in the flattest place in the United Kingdom, which is probably not my sensible decision. But I think I caught it on the uptake of climbing, and I've been doing it ever since. It's my passion, and it's been my main source of income now for a decade.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about how you got into climbing. Like, was this something that you got interested in as a kid or later on in life?
As I've got older, I've probably realized I'm probably on that kind of neurodivergent scale. So I would have an interest, and that would be my entire personality for as long as my interest. So, I mean, I did everything as a kid. I was really into painting, and I was into model making, and then I was into building, and then I would do outdoor activities, and then I would be bike riding, and I'd be rollerblading, but every time I picked up one of these things, it became my identity, and I really threw myself head on into it.
You said you're neurodivergent. Was that something that was diagnosed as a kid, or did you figure that out later in life?
As I've got older, I've dealt with my own son's neurodivergence. I started to kind of look back on my childhood and realize that my brother was definitely on the spectrum, and I was on the spectrum, and then I think my mum was on the spectrum. But back in the 80s, it was very much not really talked about. So there was also a financial recession back in that time as well. So my parents had just got a new mortgage. So from the outset as a child, I didn't really notice much was going on. And then all of a sudden, my mum decided to go and do a degree in law when having 2 children. My dad was doing 12 hours a day at work. So in this period, there was not really much parenting, I guess, going on. And then my mum ended up having a nervous breakdown from going backwards and forwards. So I kind of came home from school one day at 11 years old, and she was walking out the door with a chest of drawers saying, "I'm leaving." So going through that period of time, and then all of a sudden a dynamic shift. My dad still had to do all the work, but then I had to become everything. So I had to cook for myself, clean, do the housework. So about 12 years old, I was kind of just left to do really whatever I wanted to. So I decided not to go to school. So I didn't go to school anymore because I didn't really fancy it. So school was difficult anyway. I think being autistic, school's very busy and everything's happening all the time. So I just stole all the books from school and studied at home, and didn't realize you needed coursework as well. So I got decent grades in my exams, but I had no coursework. So yeah, that was it really. I just, kind of fended for myself a lot. I still had a very loving mum and a very loving father, but neither of them really had the time. And growing up in a very small town in the most rural area of the United Kingdom really is tough. There's not a lot to do outside, so you naturally can fall into bad circles and into bad habits. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but we're called Fenland. So growing up in Fenland, it used to be old marshland, and then as the Danish came over, they drained all the marshland, and it's now just complete flat agricultural land. So you can see as far as the eye can see, there's nothing there at all, and most of it is actually below sea level. So if they stop draining it, it will just flood again and the sea will claim back the land. So there's no climbing, there's no outdoor activity. Bike rides is probably the only thing you can really do out here. And especially going back into the 80s and 90s, the little towns have probably got a population of 15 to 20,000 people. So there's just nothing going on. Probably very similar to rural United States, kind of Midwest, kind of Nebraska, that kind of area. You've got 10, 20 miles between every little village, and in every village, everyone knows everyone. So yeah, that's kind of where I grew up, and then just longed for the city. So turned 18 and literally just fled to Bristol.
So yeah, I mean, coming from a small village of like a few thousand into a big urban metropolis, what was it like trying to navigate that? And like, how did you support yourself?
I mean, I did every job. I was a door-to-door salesman for a few years. And then I became a licensed croupier in a casino, so dealing blackjack and roulette. Then I left that and became a bar, like a waiter, and then got promoted from a waiter to running the bar. So I ran a bar for a few years, worked in the kitchen for a while, and then I moved and did some quality control in a factory. And just, I bounced around jobs. There was nothing that really grabbed me enough to really hold me into one career. Then finally I got into computers. And that really dialed me in. That was, again, like super hyper focus. And then from that, I started to build my own custom computers, and then water cooled computers, and then got in with that circle, and then ended up working with Intel and Nvidia, and then starting a computer company to build these like really cool custom computer rigs. And that was kind of like at the end of my time in Bristol, I was just starting this new business, building all of these custom computers for these big companies. And I think like a lot of people find climbing in that period of life where they're looking for something, they don't really know what. And my brother suggested try bouldering. So I kind of laughed it off because I imagined that bouldering, like, why would I bother? I want a harness and ropes. I want to go high. What's the point in climbing? I'm only going 3 meters. What's the point in that? And then he kept on telling me, no, it'd be really good for your mental health. Like, it'll sort you out. You'll meet some great people. So eventually I booked an induction at a place called the Climbing Academy in Bristol, one of the first bouldering centers in the country. Super dirt bag, really low walls. They didn't go 4.5 meters, they're about 3 meters. Loads of those like old fiberglass volumes that have been made out of chicken wire. You know, it's just really cool place. And booked it in, went in for my induction, and just fell in love. Just, you know, all the people there were really great. I met some fantastic people even on my first couple of meetings. And then I was able to climb unsupervised. So I then went on my own, started adding it to like, you know, 3 times a week going in, bought myself some climbing shoes. And then it sounds really corny, like cliche, but it is that once your feet leave the floor and you get onto the wall, it's all those worries and stresses just kind of melt away, and you're just thinking about how to climb and moving up and not falling off, and the problem solving element. So for those 3 or 4 hours I was at the center, I just wasn't thinking about all my problems, and by that it kind of helped me recover and put me in a much better mental state. And then everything just kind of started to get better from that point on.
You know, I looked back, you know, at your Instagram, and you had this post where you kind of described this life-changing climbing trip to Fontainebleau in France, back in like, you know, 2014 or something. Can you describe like what you discovered there?
So yeah, it was incredible. We stayed in a Jeep. We had 10 days, ate a load of cheese, drank a load of wine, climbed for 9 of the 10 days, walked around Fontainebleau city, and just climbed hard. And it was the first real time I'd been with strong climbers. You know, they were, a couple of them were pushing into those 7s, and back then I was just starting, you know, so watching these guys kind of push into that V8, V9, I guess the conversion would be, territory, it blew my mind, you know. And the kind of ethos that is over there and the vibe over there with everyone just having cheese and pastry and in big circles and looking after each other, and you just climbing with random people all day in these sand dunes, you know, it just took that to a next level. I already loved it and it already became part of me, but that was the next jump. I was like, this is what I want to do. And that really solidified it as this is the thing, this is the hobby, this is the lifestyle. And I think I don't know, but when you meet climbers and you start hanging around more climbers, you start to detract from that kind of capitalist mindset, and that kind of money buys happiness element starts to vanish a bit more. I think I had a lot of that in my life up until I got really into climbing and started hanging around more climbers, and being out at the crag or being at a climbing center kind of took away the need to have much else. So yeah, I started to find this more inner peace rather than always searching for that extra bit of happiness. And you know, when you get a group of people together that are passionate and you're drunk, these crazy ideas start flying. It's like, we should start a climbing center. Why don't we start a climbing center? It'd be great. We'll get back and build a climbing gym. And then out of all of us, I was the only one that did it.
So where did you end up? I mean, how did that idea lead to actually opening up a climbing gym?
Yeah, like literally I moved back to this area. Again, tiny village. I think it's got a population of about 2,000. And I was running the computer business, and we were taking orders in from China with computer cases because we had like a bespoke computer case we were selling. And as these pallets come in, I needed somewhere to store it. So I was kind of walking around, and there's a big sign outside this warehouse saying warehouse for rent. I was like, brilliant, perfect. So I chatted to the owner of that, and we agreed we were going to have it for £500 a month, so like $700 a month, for 6,000 square feet of storage space. So that tells you how in the middle of nowhere we are.
Yeah, I mean, what was the owner using that shed for in the first place? Like, how much work did you need to put into it?
So it was an old potato shed. Then they converted it to hold pumpkins, and then I think it turned into a lorry yard. Like, they brought lorries in to service them. And then when I took it over, it was just storage. They just had a load of paper products being stored in there. So you had mud all over the floor from when the potatoes and the veg was in there, and then loads of racking was covered in paper. And we made a deal that if I could have the amount of space I could clear, because he was storing stuff in there already. So I kind of went in there and we spent like a week just rearranging all of his stuff and itemizing it and putting new racking up and everything. And I managed to clear up probably 4,000 square feet out of this 6,000. And we still had no lighting. Like, electric was just 3-phase, so we had to get electricians in to put all new lights in. We had to build our own toilets. And it was just a real, like, it was just a blank shell of nothing. So we built a 9-meter vert wall, which is only 3 meters high. The in thing back then was to have top out, so you could climb on top of it. So I made it's like a 30-degree wall, and then there was a top. So you climbed out over 30 degrees at 3 meters, and then you topped out and stood up there. But everyone was up there, so we'd have kids' parties. And then we'd have like 20 children on top of this like little block. I'd just be like, my heart would be flushing, my going over saying, like, guys, you need to get down. This is like so scary, you all being up there. Within a year and a half, I'd boarded up the top and it was then full height. I was like, I'm not having people up there anymore. That's terrifying. And I think the mats actually, when we opened, the mats on that edge only came to a meter past the wall. So if you fell off, you basically fell onto the mat and then rolled onto the concrete.
Yeah.
It was just, it was like the Wild West back then in climbing centers. You could kind of get away with anything. And that was done. And I had this building with all of this climbing wall in. And then in one corner, there was an 8-foot by 8-foot room, which is my computer business. So that 8-foot by 8-foot room basically floated the climbing wall for 3 years. Because the climbing wall, some days we had like 3 visitors.
What were the clientele like in those early days? Like, who was coming in like to just session out?
It'd just be like Sean from down the road, and like the population was literally 1,000, and that's across every age group. So you imagine in our entire town, there might only have been 20 people that would even be a client anyway, because most of the people are much, much older. The more I say out loud, the crazier it is that I actually thought it was a good idea. But we'd get some people from the village would come around, and then they'd tell their children, and we'd get some children in. And then that spread to the next village and the next village, and then some people from the different towns would come in. But we did a lot of advertising, just word of mouth, telling people, just walking around, spreading the word through local businesses, and just everyone I saw or told and talked about it. I think because nothing ever happens in this neck of the woods, it was the talk of the town, literally, because it was a climbing centre in this tiny little village, and nobody could believe it had happened. So I think people would come in just because they were inquisitive and just have a look around and see what was going on.
Yeah.
You've got some real characters. I mean, some people haven't ever left the village, or they don't really venture out at all, So having this rock climbing centre just arrive. And obviously, also, people thought it was a joke because it's literally the flattest place in the country. I think Eltwell, where we built the centre, is 2 feet below sea level.
Jeez.
So it gives you an idea of and then they'd always walk in and be like, oh, it's not a real climbing centre because it's only, it's not very high, is it?
I mean, what did this look like on a day-to-day basis to just keep the gym running? Like I assume that you were the only one who worked there.
I think just being relentless, just being absolutely relentless. I think the first 2 years I took 1 day off. So kind of gives you a concept of how you had to do it. And that was, all day, every day, every shift. There was no staff. It was just me at the desk, sometimes doing a whole day with only 2 people coming in. And just literally just grinding all day, every day, learning Facebook advertising, being out on flyering, communicating and networking with anyone possible, and just being completely relentless and having belief that it could work. It's harder now as an entrepreneur than ever, but I think it's still, if you are relentless in what you do and you work hard, you will always succeed. I honestly believe that. And it just so happened that after 3 years, I think it was, at the potato shed, they came around and said, the land's been sold and you'll need to move when that project begins. So we were kind of wondering, I was like, oh, do I move? When do I go? Like, do I wait for it to be sold and then go? Because they didn't know when they were going to break ground. And then a chap came into the centre and said, I've heard you need to move.
After the break, Nate sets his sights on expansion. Stay with us.
March is race month. I've been putting the miles, nursing my knee a bit. Hasn't always been fun, but my feet have been taken care of because through it all, I've been putting my darn tough running socks through the paces. Muddy trails, cold days, very, very rainy days, snow. I've kind of done it all. Did I mention rainy days? Yes. For over 40 years, Darn Tough has been making socks in Vermont from yarn sourced from America and around the world. They pride themselves on using merino wool to create a durable sock. And personally, I also think it's super comfortable. has been working well with my feet. They back it up with an unconditional guarantee for life. If these aren't the longest lasting socks you've ever owned, return them for another pair. Kind of a good deal. With a variety of styles and different cushioning patterns to fit your preference, you can find the sock that works for you. Darn Tough is offering free shipping on any order for Diaries listeners. Use the code DIRTBAG at checkout. We'll put a link in the show note or visit darntough.com to find your new favorite pair of socks. Your feet deserve it. Thanks to Darn Tough for supporting the show and my slow running habit. If I've said I'm going to meet a friend at a trailhead at 6 a.m., I'm going to do it. I show up and never sleep in. It's the truth. It's because I'm accountable, right? Businesses that are trying to do good, they need that too. They need that form of accountability. Since 2023, Oboz Footwear has been a certified B Corp. That means Oboz is among 9,000 brands worldwide and one of the few footwear brands in the US that hold themselves accountable to standards of social and environmental performance, transparency, and accountability. Oboz cares about their impact on the planet and invests in a number of initiatives that aim to restore the natural environment. Since 2007, they've helped plant over 7 million trees. You might even be able to see some of those trees in Oregon where Douglas fir trees are planted to restore areas affected by wildfire. That's rad. Thanks to Oboz for supporting this show, but more importantly, thanks for leading in a global movement to do business differently. To find your next pair of footwear, check out obozfootwear.com/lovehiking. Oboz Footwear. Love hiking. So I'm a big coffee drinker, but only in the morning because I don't want to stay up all night. I'm psyched that Ka'Chava has a new flavor, coffee. It's made with decaffeinated coffee beans from Brazil, so if I do a workout late in the day or even at night, I can have a shake afterwards to fill me up and help me recover. And it tastes like coffee, which is a win. Ka'Chava's whole body meal shakes keep your body and mind nourished all day. With 2 scoops of Ka'Chava, you get 85 plus superfoods, nutrients, and plant-based ingredients. So not only am I getting 25 grams of plant-based protein to help me recover, I'm also getting adaptogens and supergreens at the same time. Ka'Chava has now 7 flavors to choose from, so I get to mix it up. The shakes taste great without artificial flavors, sweeteners, or preservatives. You can try Ka'Chava risk-free with their Love It guarantee. Treat yourself to the flavor and nutrition your body craves. Go to Ka'Chava.com and use the code DIARIES for 15% off your first order. That's Ka'Chava, Kachava.com, code DIARIES.
A chap came into the centre and said, I've heard you need to move. I've got an 8,000 square foot warehouse in Wisbech, which is the nearby town that we're currently in. He said, you can rent that if you want. It's available in a couple of weeks. And I was like, well, that sounds fantastic. Let me come and have a look at it. So I went to have a look at it, and that was a big cold store shed. So actually, when we went in, it had all of the dividers up with the big thermal panels. So I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they store vegetables in there. So it's big air conditioning units, and the whole warehouse is sectioned off into smaller units with a bit in the middle to run the fork trucks around in. So as you went in, it looked kind of small, because you couldn't see it because it was all in these more smaller rooms, and each room was full of vegetables. So I was like, this is great. 8,000 square feet. Yeah, perfect. Signed the lease, got the keys. They said, yeah, don't worry, we'll take everything out and you'll come into an empty shell. And damn, when I opened the door the first time to the empty shell, I was like, what? Have I made a mistake? It's massive. Seeing an 8,000 square foot unit with nothing in it was the most daunting thing I've ever experienced. And then realizing you got to fill it, like you've got to build everything inside this 8,000 square foot.
Yeah, was that an intimidating prospect? Because I imagine with a bigger space, you're going to need a much larger client base.
Yeah, just literally, I did some flyering. I started on like a social media journey. I was like, I'm going to just try and see if I can make this Instagram thing work. So I started posting loads about climbing on there and about the journey of building the climbing center and kind of vlogging that a little bit. Did some YouTube. And I think that helped kind of get the word out in our local area because I think people in the local area were sharing it. And then we put a banner on the side of the building as well, so people when they drove by or had parked next door could see that we were there. And then, just told everybody, if we got into conversation with somebody at the supermarket, oh, we've opened a climbing center down there. You go to the gym, oh, we've just built a climbing center. What do you do? Oh, I've built a climbing center. And it's so bizarre for people to see it because we're literally we're in this, back end of nowhere in this tiny town No one expects there to be this huge climbing center opening. So I think that in itself spreads the word because no one can believe it. So they tell people when they hear about it. Yeah, so I think that's what kind of spread itself. And we just really pride ourselves on really good customer service. Make really good coffee, make everyone feel welcome, chat to everybody, introduce people to each other so we have a community, and then just try and pride ourselves on that.
So, just from like a quick Google search before this interview, I read that Wisbech is like a small town of about 30,000 people. Can you give me some insight on what the town is like and, how would you describe its character?
Yeah, I've seen it. Wisbech change because I've been around the area for my whole life. So I've seen it go from like a predominantly English white, very English white kind of back end kind of town, always being classed as a rough town. People, and I don't know if it's the same in America, but in the UK, people have this habit of talking their place of origin down. So that was, oh, it's terrible. I hate it. It's horrible. It's really rough. I don't know why. I kind of think you should be proud of where you're from, but people generally slate it. So it's always been like that. And then in the 90s, we kind of opened the doors to European unions. We had a lot of Eastern Europeans come across, and that caused a load of friction because they'd work in the factories, on the field, so they'd take some of the job or perceive to take the jobs of the English people that were in the current area. So that caused loads of friction. But now I think in the last decade, everyone that migrated across has now had children and they're fully assimilated within the population of Wisbech. And now it's turning into, I see it as a much safer, much nicer neighborhood. That there's not much litter anymore. That we have the same issues that most market towns have. Still a drug problem. There's still people in the market town. There's still people in the centre. There's still a bit of a homeless issue, which I think most of the UK is dealing with at the moment, and most of the West is. But generally speaking, it seems to be on the upward trend, and people seem to be proud of it again, and people are looking after it. There's not as much graffiti, there's not as much crime, and that's really nice to see. And there's more businesses like us now starting in the area and surviving, which is a rare thing to see.
Yeah. Do you see your gym as a part of that change?
I don't want to name any names, but we've had people coming in that have been really struggling because of the issues I just mentioned, and they're now in a much, much better place, and they're now able to leave the house, and they're now able to communicate. I know they've got a circle of friends, and I've seen that many times over the last few years of being in Wisbech, and I've seen a lot of people have been able to come completely out of their shell and start almost a new life. And I think in an area of deprivation like we are, that's really rare. So if nothing else, I'm proud that I've been able to achieve that. I kind of pride the fact on that we are different to other climbing centres, and we have that unique vibe. And it's always been, for me, it's always been a case that I'm doing this job because it's a job that I love doing. And if I wasn't doing this, I'd have to do something else that I might not enjoy as much. So you could sell out tomorrow and then you're going to be twiddling your thumbs, probably wishing you were back running a climbing gym, because it's a really fun, rewarding job.
Yeah, I imagine that there's a balancing act when it comes to your idealism for what your gym should be and, the cost of doing business.
Always. I'm a real sucker for it. I try and give free climbing to everybody. Luckily, my partner is way less, I would say less kind. She's more kind than me, but she's also more business savvy on the profit margins. Like, she can look at the books and be like, no, we need to raise the prices because cost of everything has gone up. But that's I find it so hard to raise the prices because I always worry that if you put the prices up, somebody can't come climbing. And the idea that somebody that wants to climb couldn't afford it is it's really heartbreaking to me. So I always really struggle with it. But, she explains it to me as well. If we don't put the prices up, they won't be open and nobody can climb. So, you have to do it. And I do see it. And as the years have gone on, I've kind of let her take control of the pricing a lot more because I know she's got that foresight that I don't have. But to be honest, we've recently started doing a lot more children's climbing. And that has just it's been such a boom. It's been unreal. So that has taken up so much of our time, way more than I ever imagined it to. And the kids are loving it, and the best thing is you've got children in there that have never found a sport that they've got on well with, and they've found climbing and they've just latched onto it. And it's just, you can see them changing over each week to week with the lessons. You can see them developing and changing into like these really fantastic, they're coming out of their shell, they're talking more, they're more sociable, they're having fun with the other kids. It's just, it's brilliant to see.
Yeah, I coach a kids team out here, and actually we have a few kids with like pretty severe ADHD or can't sit still, and they couldn't play soccer, they couldn't play baseball, it just wasn't really working for them. Their parents were just like, I don't know what they want to do, and then they take them to the gym like this is the only thing they want to do, and they're like really good at it too.
Well, that is a huge thing that I've realized with neurodivergent kids is, and I remember it being a child myself, is that team sports are really hard. You're relying on other people, and that communication might not be there, and you might find that so stressful, and you're always masking, so it becomes exhausting. Whereas climbing, you're in a group as a social activity, but you're on your own for the sport, and it's one of the only sports I've really found like that. And I think to some of these kids, that element of problem solving and the physical activity and the social aspect, I just think it hits all those triggers, and you just watch them flourish. They come in, their head's down, they're not talking so much, and they look really shy. And you must have seen it. And then, 2 lessons in, and they come in and they're beaming, their face is great, and they finish a route they've been trying for a while, and they just, they're just elated. And they see this level of progress they've never really seen before. And all of a sudden, they're chatty and they want to talk about the routes. And it's just, and we get parents come in, like you say, with severe ADHD that says, they finished climbing and like for the first time they've been calm. Or I've never seen them calm, but when they're on the wall, they're not jittering, or their reflexes are gone, or their tics have stopped, or their stutters calmed down. All these things that these parents have never noticed before, but actually climbing is helping. And I wish there was more research into it, to be honest. I think it actually is probably one of the best things that I've ever found for it or ever seen for it.
I mean, you're providing something that you at one point needed in your life, right? Like you kind of like were looking for some kind of community, looking for, some kind of confidence building. How does that feel to be able to provide something that you were once seeking?
Yeah, it's probably one of the only times but actually since my father passed away, it's probably one of the only times I nearly cried is when I did an outreach program for a group of kids that were at risk and had a few of them had a similar upbringing to me. I mean, and these are kids. One of the kids literally on his first day came in and called me probably one of the most harshest English names you can think of. Like, I'm not doing this. This is stupid. Like real, teenagers that had a rough childhood, and after 6 weeks they all came up as polite as anything and just said thank you. It makes me feel so emotional because it's like one of those kids. He came down and started crying. And I spoke to the person that was working with him, and I said, like, what's wrong? Is he okay? He's never been told he's good at anything. And it's really hit him in the hard place. He's like 14, and no one's ever told him he's good at something. And it broke this kid, and then he came back the next time, and he tried hard, and he just like, watching these kids change and being, having a purpose, I guess. Because these kids, let's face it, they're 14 to 16, they turn 16, the system kicks them out, and they're into the world, They're looked after by these people until 16, and then whatever happens. But yeah, I think that is, I've diverged there. I started to remember that scene, and it just, it was a hard day. It was a hard day, but those kids, I think that's the thing, making sure these kids have these experiences and having it open to them. And we don't get these experiences often, but I think we try and run these outreach programs as much as possible. Because I think they're the kids that need this kind of stuff. They're the kids that need a reason, and they're the kids that need what I needed. And if we can provide that for them, hopefully, it changes their life in a positive way, so they don't end up down the wrong path.
What are your dreams for Fenrock moving forward? What do you envision?
I'd like to have more staff. Yeah, I think both myself and Amanda would like some days off soon. We haven't had a holiday for about 3 years, really. So I think, I'd like it to grow. I'd like it to be there for the community. I'd like it to flourish with the children, and for the children to create the community, and then a new community to evolve, and it to grow into a big independent centre, and to fulfill the area we're in with a needed activity. That's all I've ever wanted, and all I hope it ever grows into.
Big thanks to Nate George for sharing his story. You can check out what Nate's building at Fenrock Climbing on Instagram, or follow N8 Climbs. That's N8.climbs to see his sassy assassin setting style. Our stories come from friends of friends, and from you, our community. If you have a compelling idea for a guest or a story lead, please give us a shout. You can email us at editor@ducktapethenbeer.com. Thanks to the folks who have recently become Diaries Plus members, and to those that continue supporting us. Their support has become the bedrock so we can plan and keep making the show. If you'd like to become a member and listen to the show ad-free, we've put a link in the show notes. Join us. Want another way to help? Write us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find the show, keeps us in the charts, algorithms. Music today from Dreaming of the Stars and Brendan O'Connell. The tracks are courtesy of The Artist or Track Club. Jacob Bain and Nis Cotto composed our theme song. You can find the artist at our website, dirtbagdiaries.com. This episode was produced by Marco Seiler Gonzalez with additional production help from me. Fitz Cahal is our creative director. I'm Becca Cahal, and you've been listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to And Then What, the segment where we break down the headlines and figure out what the hell's happened since then. You may have heard rumblings about Senator Mike Lee and Representative Celeste Malloy of Utah, the elected officials who brought you last summer's attempt to sell off millions of acres of American public lands. They're now attacking Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So the point of these And Then What's is not to give a graduate level class on public land management. You shouldn't have to pass a test or write a thesis to understand what politicians are trying to do with our public lands. And Lee and Malloy, I think they know that, which is why they're using this underhanded rule called the Congressional Review Act that's never been applied to a national monument before, and it's only even been applied to public lands in the last year. It's a strange move, one that I think they understand most of us are going to miss. A national monument, a national park, a national forest, the land managers in charge of them, they need to make a playbook to manage and budget for these places. To do that, they are required to go to local communities and stakeholders, give them a chance to have input. Once former President Biden restored Grand Staircase Escalante to its original boundaries after Trump had halved it in his first administration to make way for mining, the agency in charge of the monument, the Bureau of Land Management, went about updating the management plan. They heard from ranchers, local business owners, conservation groups, passionate hikers, recreationists, and the tribes who hold the area sacred. They wrote a plan that allowed for recreation, grazing for local ranchers, protection for cultural sites, and they took input from many different people. A poll conducted by the Grand Canyon Trust last year found that 74% of Utahns support Grand Staircase Escalante Monument. Now, Lee and Malloy are saying that local voices weren't included and that we need to wipe it out. We need to start over with this management plan. Yes, there is some local opposition to the monument. There are those that would like to see coal mining in this protected landscape. They are a politically connected minority with a self-serving, very narrow definition of what local input means. Frankly, they would like to do what they please with a landscape that belongs to all Americans. Today we are joined by Autumn Gillard, coordinator for the Grand Staircase Escalante Intertribal Coalition, to break down the latest Mike Lee debacle. Who gets a say? Turns out we all do, not just Mike Lee. Grand Staircase Escalante, it is a special place in the world. It has incredible recreation opportunities. It drives tourism, powers local economies. I think sometimes what gets missed is how important it is to the tribes of the Desert Southwest. What does this landscape mean to the area's indigenous peoples?
It is more than a landscape that typically is viewed for recreation and scientific purposes. It is a holistic theological landscape that intertwines and interacts with each tribe's affiliated ancestral landscape as a whole. So it really is a ceremonial purpose of land, which is contained in the plants, the animals, the watersheds that run through this monument, the geological formations, the night skies above it, I think you could view it best in the eyes of science as a giant organism that is serving a spiritual purpose for tribes connected to the area.
I feel like when we talk to people about landscapes that they stand up for, everyone has a powerful core memory of that place. And I'm curious whether you have a memory like that.
Yeah. Me and my other half had attended a site visit there to some cultural sites, and we went on a hike to a very significant petroglyph panel. And as we were going up the hillside, climbing to this panel, we get to the first portion of it, and we immediately are awestruck by this bighorn sheep panel that has been completely defaced. And you can tell that somebody had literally hiked up a stone saw to saw this panel out of the rock face. And you could see the markings of them trying to saw it out. And it just hit me right in my heart of, oh my gosh, we've got to do something. That people have been coming here and defacing these sacred petroglyphs, particularly for Southern Paiutes. Bighorn sheep are very sacred to us. And so when our ancestors would, depict these figures on the rock, it was for ceremonial purposes. I knew that this was a really sacred place, that somebody had put intention on this environment and that somebody else had come along to deface it. And that was where my light bulb moment came of, we've got to do something to protect this landscape.
Yeah. In last year, 6 tribes, all with ancestral ties to the monument, came together to form the Grand Staircase Escalante Intertribal Coalition. The management plan that Senator Lee and Representative Malloy are trying to unravel included deep input from the tribes in how to care for this incredible part of the world. When I read or listen to what Lee and Malloy are saying, I think the subtext is, we don't want the tribes to have a say. Does the coalition see it that way?
So, not speaking for the coalition as a whole, and just speaking from my own thought process, one of the things to me that was alarming with the information that was coming out from their offices was the intention that was pushed on local voices weren't integrated into the commenting process of this resource management plan. But when you look at the process of how the Bureau of Land Management runs an RMP, they have to follow early Section 106 and NEPA process, which is, a red line item for the United States federal government to reach out to interested public communities so that they can put commenting in. And, it to me was kind of like drawing a line of like, we're not considering local tribal community members and citizens and constituents as local people. We're considering them as something else. And so for me, that was something that, was kind of hurtful because, a lot of our tribal community members, they live in Utah and they are very active in commenting about their public lands. And so, that was something that had kind of struck me of like, well, local people were included and tribal people are local community members. Yes, we're in tribal communities, but we're also citizens of these states.
This sort of rewriting of history, rewriting of actual like public sentiment, it seems like it's done to benefit their needs. And I'm curious, beyond Senator Lee and Malloy, who benefits from scrapping a management plan like this? Like, who will win from your perspective?
I don't think anybody will win. I think that it is a sidestep of federal regulation and policy. It's removing the federal process that the government has to seek comment and to seek participation from local interested community members. When you look at some of the information that's contained in this resource management plan, you'll see statistical information that show that it actually favors more of the local community members. Grazing rights, for instance, 93% of this monument is open to grazing. There's lots of things that you can see local communities benefited from. If there's an issue with a document, let's work on the amendment process. Let's not sidestep outside of that federal process and just completely remove something that is required to help land managers manage this beautiful landscape.
It also seems like what you're saying is that it sets a precedent where if this works this time, they could use this tool to undermine so many other places in our country too. How we care for them, how we manage them, how we support them on a budget level. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's a big concern because you think about the mission of public lands and why these agencies were created. Why is Bureau of Land Management established? Why is the National Park Service established? These public lands are established so that American citizens can interact with their landscape, but also have a voice in how they're managed. The CRA removes that process, and it removes the American citizens' voice's right to speak on their public land. It removes the democratic process. It also removes the federal trust responsibility that the United States federal government has to tribal nations in consultation and activating tribal sovereignty and tribal rights.
For people listening, is there something they can do that would have an impact on this? Is there a way for people to help change any of this right now?
This is a perfect time for those who are passionate and interested in helping this cause to exercise their constitutional rights by contacting their local legislators. Get on the phone, call these state representatives' office, call your local people in your offices in your state and speak on how, this is very harmful to public lands and this is not the right procedure that we should be going through. I also think that, right now, the atmosphere that we're in as a country, that it is always important to maintain a positive mindset. And so just sending positive energy and thoughts to this beautiful landscape right now that needs protection, all of the animals, all of the resources, because we really want this area preserved for future generations to be able to explore, love, and engage with their landscape and their public land.
We're posting these pieces on our website, dirtbagdiaries.com, in case you want to share. And then what? Thanks to Diaries Plus members for making this reporting possible. Links are on our website and in the recent show notes. Thank you for caring about public lands.